Today's webinar is an important one with the Hindu Dvesha initiative focusing on America's caste wars. This is going to be an ongoing series, and this is part 2, the evidence gap. America's caste wars against the Hindu American community continue unabated. Where is the evidence about this? We're going to dig into this today, and we will start with Dr. Jay Bansal ji, who is the Vice President of Education for the World Hindu Council of America.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ankurji. Namaste, everyone. Thank you for being here as part of this important conversation on a very hot topic of our times, the caste issue. As Ankurji pointed out, we've called it the America's Caste Wars. It's an ongoing series, and this is the second webinar in this series. So welcome once again. So yes, I am with the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, and I'm responsible for the education part on civilizational matters. And I have the distinct honor of having a number of panelists, regular panelists and eminent panelists on the docket today. Dr. Subhash Garg ji and Kalyan Vishwanath ji, they are here. And we're expecting 2 more to be joining us shortly. So let me first do the honors of introducing our 2 panelists who are already here. Dr. Subhash Garg is a retired professional from the US space industry. He retired in 2009 with numerous awards, patents, and publications to his credit. And since then, he's focused on study and research about the misrepresentation of everything about Hindus and the Hindu ecosystem in the West. Most recently, he has authored a number of papers about caste, which I will refer to, but which you can all find on our website that I will show in a minute, or show the link to in a minute. Shri Kalyan Vishwanath ji, I think, is a regular on this, on this webinar platform. He is currently serving as the president of Hindu University of America, and is guiding its renewal and revitalization. So, welcome, Kalyan ji. He was a long-time student of Pujya Swami Dayanand Saraswati ji of Arshvidya Gurukulam, established in the Advait Vedanta Sampradaya, and was associated with his work for over 20 years. So welcome, Kalyanji. I also have Shri Sarabjit Thakurji. Welcome, Sarabjit. I'm glad you were able to join us today. He is a graduate of IIT Delhi with master's degree in computer science and then business degree from Rice University and Santa Clara University. He is a tech entrepreneur and mentor based in the Silicon Valley, and he's keenly interested in Hindu civilizational matters, knowledge systems, history, and the existential threat that is currently faced by the Hindus worldwide. We will eventually have, hopefully shortly, Richa Gautamji, and I'll introduce her when she comes. She will be joining us from Bharat. So with that, what I like to do before I turn give the floor to Subhashji to go over this subject in more depth, I like to introduce this initiative called hindudvesha.org that we began a little over 2 years ago now, and it has a number of accomplishments under its belt that we are justifiably proud of, and I just like to share a little bit about its history, its reason for its existence, and what we've been doing to further this platform. So allow me to go into presentation mode. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my slides. Please, someone please let me know if you're seeing my slide. Kalyanji, see my screen? You have to unmute.
Yes, we can see.
Lovely. Okay, so without further ado, I think it's not news to anyone in in the Hindu ecosystem that our identity is under an all-around attack from a variety of sources. Academia is a big part of it. Entertainment industry certainly. News media, whether it's New York Times or Washington Post or many of the other news channels. NPR is a big one. BBC. Facebook, well, the entire social media has become a very popular platform for, passing anything as real news, and it's a great way to spread narrative. Finally, there are a number of organized groups that carry something against the Hindus, the Hindu social order, Hindu ecosystem, and they are doing a great job of spreading false narrative about us. I see Richa Gautamji has just joined us. I'll introduce her in a second. In fact, let me just do that now. Richa ji, namaste and welcome.
Namaste.
She's a co-founder and executive director of CARES Global and has been active in the field of advocacy and human rights for over a decade. She's a senior research associate at Indus University and a fellow at the Center of Indic Studies at Ahmedabad. She has published articles under her byline for various newspapers internationally and is a speaker and presenter in media and social media. Welcome once again, Richa. And I'll continue with my few slides with that. Okay, so Hindu social order, Hindu ecosystem is under attack from various directions, and Hindu society is unaware of it. Generally, at large, I'm not saying everyone is unaware of it, but a broad cross section of Hindu society is either unaware or uncaring about what's happening to it. The situation is like a frog being slowly warmed up from the bottom. It feels the water is warm, but not quite boiling yet. By the time it gets unbearable, it's too late. So that is the kind of condition we find ourselves in. And that's with that kind of recognition, we started this initiative called hindudvesha.org about 2 years ago. And the idea was, if we were able to reach out to our, Hindu community at large and also the society that we live in, but primarily, Hindu society, and talk about what's happening, to explore this systemic Hinduphobia that exists by doing research, analysis, and then educate, and also where possible and where feasible, respond to the situations. And we found a couple of eminent sponsors to help out with this initiative. My own organization, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, is one of these two sponsors, and Dharma Civilization Foundation is the other one. And we are very thankful to all the support that they have provided, for this initiative thus far. Now, we call ourselves Hindu Dvesha. What's in a name? This phenomenon that we're calling Hindu Dvesha actually goes by many different names. Hinduphobia is the most popular. Hindumesia is also appearing here and there, but we chose to call it Hindu Dvesha. I'm actually not going to argue or put forth a case as to why Hindu Dvesha is the right terminology for it, but that's what we've chosen to do. It's a dialogue that we can have another time, but at the end of the day, we're talking about roughly the same issues, except the name is different. All right. What have we done over the last 2 years? Quite a lot, actually. And remember that this is all a volunteer initiative. There's no paid writers, there are no paid presenters. There's no it's all done by people like you and I. So we've been able to raise a team of writers, volunteers, through initiatives like this, webinar like this. We call out people to join us, and some of them raise their hands and say yes, they want to be part of it. We have roughly 20 people on our list of different skills and different time commitment and so on and so forth, but all are and more are always welcome. We have a pretty good online presence. We have a website that I'll give the link to in a second. It's a pretty decent website and doing quite well. Thank you. We have over 1,000 visitors, unique visitors every month. We certainly like to see that 10 times that, but it's not a bad place to be for now. We also have some social media presence. The people in the in our writers group are people of more or less people of my age, so they are not necessarily all social media savvy. So we are we're not great at this game, but we do have some presence, Facebook as well as Twitter, and we certainly look for young talent in that department. And so we have all that going. Now, over the last 2 years, we've been able to publish close to 250 articles. Some are quite large, detailed, deeply researched articles. Others are simple blogs. Others are simple reporting of incidents, Hindu Dvesha incidents that we come across. But 250 unique pieces for people to go and read. We've held several webinars over the last 2 years, like this one, and we held a two-day multi-day virtual conferences during this period. What is unique about our website is that a lot of the material is organized under various libraries. So, for example, we have a library on swastika. There are a number of articles, videos, and so on and so forth that you can go and read on that subject. There's one on what Islam has done to the world, and particularly to Hindus and to our religious things. We have one on what academia is doing to spread Hinduphobia, create and spread Hinduphobia. One on news media and one on caste system. There are many more libraries like that in the cards that will be coming out in time, in months to come. So there's a lot going on here. And now on to the caste system and why we are here today. It's obviously the latest hot button issue. There are a number of institutions that have jumped on the bandwagon of this caste thing. There are certain syndicates, Hindu-hating syndicates, that are promoting this as a widespread phenomenon in the U.S. And so we've taken the initiative to build a collection of original articles by our own team, and that now resides on our Hindu Dvesha website. And we also have an archive of relevant third-party articles. And you can go to our website and read about all this. Finally, we have this webinar series, the educational webinar series that we're calling America's Caste Wars. This is part 2 of it. And the tagline here is the evidence gap. Where is the evidence? And of course, in future, we'll have more webinars on this subject. Finally, this is my last slide, and then I'll turn it over to Subhashji for his exposition of the matter. How you can help, how you can get involved. There are many different ways. Obviously, we've created the knowledge base, we've created the archives of knowledge, but it's useless unless someone goes and reads it. So I invite all of you and your friends and family and contacts to go to the website. It's simply called hindudvesha.org, and please read the content that interests you and forward it to others. You can visit us on Facebook. It's simply called Hindu Dvesha. You can go to Twitter. It's called Hindu Dvesha because we could not get Hindu Dvesha handle. And of course, you can join our team of writers. Later on in this discussion, we will put out a poll, ask you if you want to join us in this effort. And finally, no one turns away money. It costs money. So if you are so willing, you can go to our website and click on the donate button. With that, thank you very much for your patience. And I'm going to now ask Subhashji to take over and tell us all about this subject.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jayji, for a great introduction to the entire subject of this Hindu Dvesh. So I'm going to be speaking on part 2 of this Caste War seminar. Let me see if I can put my screen sharing on. I have been spending a lot of time reading a bunch of stuff that interests me about Hindus for several years now, and you just pick up stuff that sounds kind of shocking if you did not know about it before. So this will be, in particular, we'll talk about the phenomenon where people who are opposed to Hindus can get away scot-free, making all kinds of wild statements without being asked or challenged, and we have to work hard for every little bit of progress. All right, so basically the three things that most of you are aware of. In the city of Seattle, an ordinance explicitly banning caste discrimination has been passed by 7-1 margin, which tells you the strength of the other side. On the other hand, the Cisco case, part of it has been dismissed for lack of evidence. And then, unfortunately, my California senator in my specific district, Aisha Wahab, started this bid to make caste discrimination illegal in California. Now, I won't get into this. You all know the problem is not with caste discrimination, but with pointing the finger at the word caste. So that's what we're opposed to. We're not opposed to banning caste discrimination because it's already illegal in India as well as here and the rest of the world. So with that piece of news, let me go and say why we call it a war. A war has to have two sides. And the two sides here are the Hindus as they are and Hindus according to the West. And these two are different in so many areas, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. And the question is, why do they stay apart? And we will examine that a little bit. So what are the two sides in a little bit more detail? One is what the sociologists would call the self. So that's your own depiction of yourself, of your own community, and that's what we choose to call the reality, because we think it is the reality. And that's the Hindu model or the Indian model. It's been recently, the word Indic knowledge has been applied to it. So I want to acknowledge that. One of the problems with this is there's no real major university or institution recognized worldwide that specializes in the self, understanding of Hindus, including in India. So it's published informally, thanks to social media and self-publication, with negligible institutional and academic support, despite the fact that, in our view, that's the correct representation. The other thing is what the sociologists call the other. And I mean, if you're, if you're, depicting someone other than yourself in your community, there are definite biases, there are different perspectives and viewpoints that creep in. There's debate on whether regarding someone as the other is more valid or less valid, but certainly in the case of Indians and Hindus, it is less valid. Some of the problems are that it inherits the colonial evangelical roots. So let me explain that a little bit. Colonial is the imperative to rule a country. If you want to rule a large country with 30 or 40,000 people, you have to get into their brain, and you have to tell them things about themselves that make them feel inferior and make them feel that you are superior. So that's part of the colonial thing. There's also the colonial imperative to divide and rule. I mean, when the British came into India, they had nothing. They somehow managed to get Bengal, and then from there, with divide and rule, they went over the entire country. So both these things come into the colonial narrative, and I think they were deliberately considered in creating some of these, explanations of India. The evangelical part is the conversion thing. I mean, that after 1858 or 1813, I think, the missionaries were able to come and spread their wings. And a lot of these negative characteristics of Indian temples and untouchability and Brahmin and all these things is really comes from the evangelical roots. It has been shown recently by British researchers. So the other model is essentially it's a caricature. It's a superficial caricature of a highly complex Hindu literature, which is more complex than any religion has ever seen, and with many more threads of thought and many different people arguing. We've always been argumentative, we've always been contentious, but despite all that, we can't agree on a name for Hindu Dvesh or Hindu, but despite that, we make progress, and we are mature enough to accept all three of them and realize the differences are not worth fighting over. Okay, if you were a Muslim, you'd be killing each other over Shia versus Sunni. Okay, but here we don't do that. So there's a lot of advantages, I think, to the diversity or the tolerance of diversity and the freedom of Hindu thought, even though the Westerners have not been able to understand that. So what I would like to say is, as we all know, the Western model prevails, but it prevails because of power, not because of truth. They own the book publishing, they own the media, they own online portals, the academic industry, the media, everything. So it's the power of Western outlets that controls the world. Whether it's truth or not, I don't know, ask Donald Trump or somebody. So, okay. So by the way, can everyone hear me well? I mean, if not, please let me know in chat. Okay, so why are we not able to do more towards making these two sides come closer to each other? So there are three major gaps. One is the power status gap. We don't have an Oxford or a Cambridge or a Harvard. And secondly, this publication industry runs on peer review, and peer review is a great mechanism for shutting out disruptive, Indian or internal research. So anything you want to publish that does not agree with the fundamental colonial narrative, you will not be able to publish. And so I was an academician for like 5 years, so I have some idea of how incestuous and how close-knit this academic community is, and how difficult it is to make, especially if you're talking with opinions and not, hard data from a result or from a test. Opinion counts for a lot. So it's very difficult, if not impossible, for our side to break into this industry. And thirdly, there's no institution. The government of India should set up a number of research institutes, looking at this point of view and furthering it. But anyway, for right now, we completely suck in terms of power and status. Our communication is a problem too, because anybody who tries to get a letter published in New York Times or Washington Post knows they can simply shut you out. They don't have to publish anything that you say. And so this goes all the way to the academic world. In the political world, you have a process of prevailing, and sometimes that works. But otherwise, it's difficult for us to get into the other camps. So the third thing is what I'm calling the evidence gap, and that's this interesting phenomenon where, for example, I'll give you an example. Like if you say Mexicans are murderers and rapists, half the country is on your case. How can you say that? That's obviously not true. But if you say the upper caste Indians are trying to bring the casteism in this country and not allow the lower caste to get ahead, people will believe you right away. They will never ask you for evidence to prove it. So now Aisha Wahab says that caste is there in every religion, and now she says it's in every country all over the world. Nobody ever asks her, prove it. So this is what I call the evidence gap. So, people on the right side of this equation, which is the colonial side, can get away with no evidence or insufficient evidence. We cannot. So the gap between the evidence required for an assertion and evidence offered by the West, or by whoever, is an evidence gap. And in this category, there are also invented evidence or dishonest evidence that we hear about. For example, there was this bulldozer thing in New Jersey where they put a picture of a bulldozer as a symbol of suppressed evidence of Muslims, and that's completely invented. So, but what I'm trying to say is that there are two sides to almost anything about India. What we call the real side, or the Indian side, or the self side, has great difficulty making itself felt, although we are making a lot of progress and we have to do a lot more work. And the reason for that is one of the big reasons for that is the fact that they can make statements that don't get challenged, and our statements get challenged all the time. So now I'm not specifically tailoring this presentation to this California bill SB 403, although I easily could have, but I'm trying to keep it more generic. And so besides the power and status gap and the communication gap, there is this evidence gap, which really makes it very difficult, for us to even to sound reasonable, or even to sound like someone who should be heard. Forget about prevailing. So okay, so with that, I will go to this chart. Which the point of this chart is that the discrepancy between the self model and the other model is not just limited to religion or caste. You can see many different threads in here. I just picked 10. The origin of the Indians, the origin of the Indian languages, origin of agriculture, the dates. Are they astronomically valid, or are they just constrained by the construction of the universe in 4004 BC, according to the Bible? And science and math origin, God's origin of this caste system, writing. How could you have written the Mahabharata without being able to write? It's 100,000 verses. You can't carry it in your head. But the Westerners say no, there was no writing. And there are a number of missing books, like maybe 100 or something books referred to in existing literature, and they say, well, they were never written. Somebody just knew that something like this was going to be written, but we say that it was destroyed and burned. We know there were libraries that were burned. The Takshila and Nalanda libraries. The Nalanda library burned for 3 days, according to some witnesses. Was Islam, did they convert us by Sufi philosophy, or did they convert us by terror? So the point is that no matter which page you turn or where you look at, there's a gap, there's a disconnect between the Western statements, which happen to be dominant because of power, and what we think is the reality. So now I'll give you some examples. There's this very powerful seminal kind of paper by Michael Witzel, who, as we know, is the dean of the Western Indologists. And in this paper, he essentially, there's no original research. He just has read a number of writers on the Indian side. And his point here is that none of the work that's been done by them, by Talgeri or by Kak or some of the other people, is valid, because it's based not on research but based on Hindu nationalism. What they want to do is to prove the Hindu superiority, and it's a very interesting paper. I think the people, I would go ahead and urge you to read it. He's actually done quite a bit of work. He's read a number of papers, apparently, certainly claims to have read. And then at the end of it, he says, well, everything is due to Hindu nationalism, and just like in Nazi Germany or in communist Russia or China. And the problem is, because of Witzel's stature, this contempt became normalized. So now, like for example, this conference on dismantling global Hindutva, or many of the other things, they would not talk to you. Like Ajay Malhotra's books, which are very well researched, extremely well prepared, they'll say, well, you're a Hindu nationalist, we don't have to talk to you. So that response, I believe, became more robust because of Michael Witzel's paper. So that's just my thinking. So evidence gaps, there come in different types. I just picked some examples. One is just a misinterpretation, or at least what appears to be misinterpretation, although it could be an agenda behind it. There could be something specific behind it, but I think it's just misinterpretation. The statement you will hear in a lot of Western media, caste system is 3,000 years old, which is interesting that they have this round number from somewhere. And now, if you look for the evidence for it, they will point you to Purush Sukt, which does not mention Varna at all. It just mentions Brahman, Kshatriya, Shudra and Vaishyas, and it likens them to parts of the body. And the point is that you need all the parts of the body to function in order to have a complete society. It's not that one is inferior to the other. And Arvind Sharma-ji at McGill has completely demolished this nonsense about Purush Sukt, the misinterpretation. But the point is, you still will see an article in the Guardian or in the BBC or somewhere saying Indian caste system is 3,000 years old. So it becomes like an entrenched myth that people repeat all the time, and it happens to be false. So of course our statement is there's no rigid category. There have been jatis, there have been many jatis, and they have changed. And in one family, you could have 4 people belong to different occupations and ending up with different varna, not just one jati, based on their loan and on their performance. This case, I will say that Howard Dirks at Princeton and some other people have said this and have shown this. And if you look at the Wikipedia article on caste system in India, you will see this statement presented there. So there are some changes that are occurring. Okay. Second type of evidence gap is simply an imposition. The man decides this is what's going to be, and that's it. And that happened to Manusmriti, because the British courts didn't know what Hindu law was about. They had Brahmin advisors who contradicted each other, because nobody agrees with anybody in Hinduism. That's normal. They thought that was bad, so they had to find a law book. So William Jones came across this Manusmriti, and he knew Sanskrit. He taught himself Sanskrit, so he translated it, and it became the Hindu law code. And whether it was meant to be a law book or it was used as a law book, nobody cared. Whether the version, the Calcutta version that Jones was translating had interpolations from other cultures, nobody cared. And so now it's well known that Manusmriti is just one of the Dharma Shastras and Sutras, and there's a lot of variation in these things. And they were never actually meant to be laws. It was not a book of laws. It was meant to be interpreted by the king. And in any case, in many Hindu books, they tell you that the wise people can interpret the book according to space and time and conditions. And that is true in Manusmriti also. So that part, the Westerners completely miss. They are used to a biblical, literal text, and they say, oh, this is the Hindu text. But there's no such thing. So that's another big problem. So third type of evidence gap is popular belief. So people, they don't necessarily mean it as an academic thesis, so they don't necessarily feel they have to offer any evidence. But they still think there is evidence. So one example of this is, do Hindus prefer white people or lighter skinned people? And is that because the Aryans who invaded India were light skinned? And in 1965, I had an American professor who was teaching us in IIT Kanpur, who was teaching us European history, and he asked this question in the class, how come your Vetemurian ads, say wheatish complexion, white, and all this stuff? And we said, why are you reading our Vetemurian ads? So, but apart from that, so it so happens a lot of our Devi Devtas are dark, even black. On the other hand, the Turks and the Arabs and the English were all white. And naturally people, conquered people look up to the boss. Many of them do. So, the white skin became associated with, with higher status. It had nothing to do with the Aryans, because there were no Aryans. I mean, there was no Aryan invasion. So here's an example again where people will say this, blithely without any, evidence, and if you examine it, it really is not there. Now the fourth type, which is giving us a lot of trouble recently, are political statements. And they usually come out from a Muslim organization like an IIMC or CAIR or Muslim politician, or the other side is the extremist, the leftists, and there are also militant Dalits. There are many Dalits who are not militant. There are Ambedkarites, many of them, or some of them I've talked to. They are reasonable people. They are not crazy like Sanmazi Sundarajan. So there's a diversity all over. But this type is giving us a lot of trouble, using a lot of our community's resources, but at the same time bringing us together. It's creating a movement, which is, I should thank them for that, because otherwise, we probably would never talk to each other on these subjects. So here's some examples that I think you can read. One thing I would mention is this thing about concentration camps. I don't know how many of you saw this article, but there was this article with really jazzy graphics with one, and the guy said there's one camp he's seen and 2 under construction, and it was all fiction because you never saw anything about that later. But they're trying the best to fan the flames of anti-Hinduism or whatever else. So I like the word anti-Hinduism because it rhymes with anti-Semitism, which we already know is bad. So, and the last thing I would point out is this one: the Hindus cannot be allowed to speak for Hindus. That's actually very common. If you look at the people writing these articles in Time and Washington Post and New York Times, virtually all of them are not Hindus. And it seems like they never even talk to Hindus. Now, I had a little break once with LA Times. I sent it, tweeted at the chief executive, the chairman of the board, and it created a lot of flurry in their editorial room. They agreed to meet with us, and at the last minute they found some excuse to not meet with us because one of us had published an article or something. They could hang their hat on it, and so I said, no, we are not going to meet. So basically, Hindus are not allowed to speak for Hindus. And you can check that out, notice it on your own. I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but I've seen it, noticed it. All right? So I should probably also mention this Aisha Wahab thing. Caste discrimination is pervasive and urgent. The thing is, in this bill that she has introduced, they admit that existing civil rights law in the U.S. Bans caste discrimination already because it bans race, ancestry, and national origin. So that all of that includes caste. But then they say, well, but because caste injustice is so pervasive and so urgent in California, we have to have a special law. So, and that's totally without evidence. The only evidence for that is one report, which a lot of people have criticized. So I think my point on this slide is that these political statements are increasingly being used against us, and I think one of the weapons that we should use more often is to say, give us the evidence, show me. If Omar says, they want to kill 200 million people, show me where it says 200 million Muslims, or that we want to kill them. And I think if we challenge them to provide evidence, perhaps they will feel a little bit more disconcerted because in this culture, you are supposed to be rational, even if you are not. So if somebody challenges the basis for your statement, it's not something that you can shrug off. You have to respond to it. They might still call you Hindu nationalist, but at least you can try. So I think with that, these are the 4 types of evidence gaps that I wanted to mention. This is also very interesting in nature. There's a paper that shows caste privilege is rampant among IIT IIM faculty. Well, what is rampant is the correlation, not the causation. Okay. So, yes, a lot of IIT IIM faculty are upper caste, but they are not faculty because they are upper caste. Okay, their caste has nothing to do with it. But if you read the article, it gives the impression that caste is the driver. So there's a lot of this, BS, weird stuff going on that I think if people read a little bit more critically, they'll find a lot of issues like this. And by that I mean not us. We are this group here. Obviously, we are dedicated to Hindu causes, but the general population of Hindus they just aren't aware of these things, like Jayji said, and I wish that they would be more aware of it. All right, so I think with that I'll go to this thing. There are gaps. What happens because of gaps? One thing we know, obviously, that we cannot, narrow the disconnect between the reality and the model as the other. And again, to sum up, the Western view of everything Hindu conflicts with reality. One of the reasons is different standards of proof, because they believe the colonial evangelical narrative, and therefore they feel no additional evidence is needed. We don't believe that, so there's a gap right there. And because of these gaps, we have to work much harder and still face barriers. We need institutional support. One thing we can do more often, I think, is to call out the lack of evidence when statements are made that without any justification. And I think hopefully India as a country will at some point take it seriously to correct the distortion.
Yeah, so I think we are getting an echo.
It's much better now. Oh, much better. All right. Okay. In that case, why don't I ask Kalyanji first to share his thoughts on the subject? You heard Subhashji, talk about various aspects of this evidence gap, as he points out. Perhaps there are other aspects you'd like to cover.
Yeah, so I think if we take the issue of evidence gap and take one more step in the general direction, right? One of the things that we'll find that's very prevalent is that very often the exception is used to make the rule, reinforce the rule. In other words, right, an instance of discrimination, which is always easy to find, okay, instead of evaluating it using some objective standard as to how widespread it is the phenomenon. Is it something that out of 100 people, 90 people are engaging in caste-based discrimination, or is a one instance that has been uncovered somewhere is often used as conclusively demonstrating the narrative. Okay, so this is an issue, and very often the evidence actually is only relevant nowadays in a court of law, where unless matter is litigated, like for example the Cisco lawsuit, it ran into the evidence gap squarely in the court of law, and my understanding is it was dismissed because there was no evidence for whatever the allegation that was being made. But in the media, in the academia, where pushing a narrative becomes much more easily possible in the guise of freedom of speech, the evidence is completely ignored. And the challenge we have is unless it gets into a court of law and litigated as a matter of like a case with two sides arguing with evidence, only then the evidence seems to matter. Otherwise, Michael Witzel can say whatever he wants, the New York Times can say whatever it wants, and there is a complete lack of concern for evidence. This is one issue I wanted to highlight. There is another issue which I think we should also take note of, which is throughout the Hindu literature, there has always been this narrative upholding Varna Jati as a social order, as well as counter arguments for why it should not, or why it is a problem. The internal arguments within the Hindu world, as represented in many texts, is often conflated and construed to be evidence that is bolstering Western narratives about India, about Hinduism, about Hindu social order, society, etc. So there is no discrimination between the internal critique within the Hindu world and the external attack on Hindu Dharma, and the two get conflated. There's a lot to be said about that, but I'll stop here and then we will pass it on to the other panelists. Thank you. Namaste.
So thank you, Kalyanji, for sharing your perspectives. So Sarjeet, how about your thoughts on evidence and how it plays out in the on the world stage?
Quickly, I think evidence is very important, but to me the narrative is even more important than the evidence. And the reason we are losing in the West on caste and the other Hindu issues is because a narrative, very strong, powerful narrative, as Subhashji pointed out, has been created, and it's repeated daily, and the evidence becomes secondary. Actually, we can raise a lot of hue and cry about lack of evidence, but it doesn't matter. I'll point to the latest issue of The Economist, which I received yesterday, on page 34, there's a halfway or three-fourths of a page article. It says, Rewriting Indian History. Narendra Modi is retrofitting his country's past to control its future. I won't read the whole thing, but it talks about the textbooks being revised radically by the Hindu nationalists using the National Council of Educational Research and Training, which for 70, 80 years has been suppressing particularly the Islamic history in the name of communal harmony. So we don't want to disturb the communal harmony, and therefore they have been, just setting aside all the atrocities, the record of 600 years of Islamic rule. Now, some of that is being reversed, and a big hue and cry in The Economist, the big rant here. Consider the abuses of history that flow from this fever dream. It is impossible to understand the Indian story without appreciating the immense role of the Mughal emperors. Invaders from Central Asia, these Mughal dynasts ruled much of India, often illustriously, sometimes with bigotry. Okay, this is the Economist's version. And it goes on and on and on, and saying expunging non-Hindus from Indian history and oppressing them in reality are related consequences of that exclusionary creed. The increased persecution of non-Hindus that Mr. Modi's warped history will invite is more worrying still. So they are complaining about the new, the textbooks revisions by the Educational Research and Training Council, which I think in a way it's a victory for us. Here is the other side complaining about lack of evidence, and our side is trying to reclaim the initiative. So I actually was quite pleased to read this. So I think we need to do something similar in the US. It may take some time. It may take more than the Hindu Dvesha initiative, but I think that's what we need. I agree that evidence is lacking, and evidence should be created. Maybe something akin to the equality labs by a more objective, organization would be warranted. But grabbing the initiative, as the Modi government seems to be doing in India, by revising some of these textbooks correctly, in my opinion, is the way to go. And as India becomes more powerful, Hindus become more, more powerful and better recognized. I think we can do that. It's a tall order. It's not very easy, but I think this, we are making some steps in that direction. But I found this article, the rant in The Economist, very encouraging, because now the other side is complaining about lack of evidence.
Thank you, Sarojit ji. So I think your point is that the narrative itself becomes the evidence.
I think so. I think that's my point, yes.
Yeah, okay. So as more pervasive the narrative gets, less room there is for countering it. And I think that's a very valid point. So, Richa ji, your thoughts? I know you've done some fundamental work in this area and written a number of articles already. So perhaps you have something different to share with us than what's already on the table.
Thank you, JBG, Jay Bansalji. Actually, I think we've really taken the graph from the evidence gap to talking about, like Kalyanji said, about transposing one single case on the entire community, and then as Sarabjit said, building a narrative around that, which Equality Labs has been doing, and a Cisco case has become that one swallow that is making the summer on caste discrimination. What I want to say here is the egregiousness with which they are building the narrative of what is actually the opposite of caste discrimination. I think for us today, the challenge is that we have to pick up the gauntlet and call out that bluff, which has been carrying on for way too long. So far, I think we did not have an outlet. Today, we can hold at least a webinar, we can write in alternate media channels and portals and speak about this issue. We have the ability to go to our senators and congressmen and talk about this. There is a website called cascade.org, which is a whistleblower website, which actually calls out all of the egregious fabricated lies and fabricated evidence, prosecutorial abuse, and lack of due process that takes place in the Cisco case, calling out Iyer and Kampala as the upper caste Brahmins who subdued and harassed a Dalit, when actually this is a Dalit who was hired by Iyer, who was actually compensated in millions by Iyer, and who actually, when he the position that he claims is he was not given is a position that he did not even apply for, which was a rule at Cisco. And also the fact that Iyer actually promoted another person who happens to be a Dalit. So this is the egregious nature of fabrication of evidence, and this is happening by a state government agency. That is something that we have to care about. The fact that Equality Labs, a 7-year-old survey, is being used, a fake unscientific survey that it was claimed even by Equality Labs as something that was just an online survey. And also the fact that the judiciary did not accept that survey as evidence in the court of law for Cisco case. So then how is the legislature using the Cisco case, and the the senators are using Equality Labs as the main organization that is driving this narrative and this policy within our within California, even within Seattle. So these are the two big pillars that are supposed to be driving the caste discrimination policy, and the reasons for it. So I think that there is a big challenge for us as Indian Americans to decolonize from the caste narrative. The fact that the third pillar of this whole argument is the definition of caste as a social, rigid, hierarchical model within Hinduism, which as a religion sanctions this sort of discrimination between, say, a Brahmin as a top of the position and the Dalits at the bottom. And, if anyone is a Hindu here, they would know that this is incorrect. The Dalit is a fabric. It's a term that was called a colonial term that was invented in late 1800s or early 1900s. So they have not come up with a new script. Their script and narrative is the old colonial caste, Dalit, and Adivasi, these three terms which are absolutely not part of any of our scriptures. I want to make one last point, that we really do not have to explain to everybody what jati and varna is and what manusmriti is. I feel like, I know that Subhashji brought that up, and that is an important thing because we have been hit with those tropes constantly, conflating caste and jati and varna. But I don't see why we have to explain, because, those are diluted identities even at this moment. We really don't carry those. And we've had sufficient surveys proving that in India, and sufficient surveys proving that in the United States. And Manusmriti is definitely not a text that is being used for legal jurisprudence anywhere within our Hindu fold. So all in all, I think I want to rest my case with just the fact that, there is a deep need at this time to decolonize, and the fact that there is a certain Modi government that is at this time a target is clear. It's a target for 2024. That is clear in this entire game of Hindu Dvesha. And also the fact that the UN, I think in UN there's a special rapporteur for caste at this time, but Modi government at least is proactively sending their representative there. And they had Dalit I was at the UN actually this couple months ago, and basically there was a lady who spoke about the affirmative action program being the largest ever in the world, that has helped so many people, climb up the ladder of social equity and and become part of the mainstream. So I think I will rest my case there as to the fact that there is a deep, process and churn going on, of which we are part, and Hindu Dvesha is also a part of that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ritesh, for your thoughtful comments. So there are a couple of things I just want to mention before we close for the day. Firstly, you'll see on your screen a very brief poll to see if any one of you is interested in being part of this initiative, the Hindu Dvesha initiative, in any capacity. You could be a writer, you could be, general volunteer, or, well, a donor, I suppose. But that's, just indicate your interest on one of the 4 or 5 options that are put in there. The second thing is, when I look at the QA box, there are a number of interesting questions that I think some of them have been already answered. There was one question about why aren't we suing? Yeah, it's a good question. I think everyone wants to sue, the false promoters. But the problem is that there is no general support from the community at large. These things, it's needless to say that these things cost money, and a lot of money, and a lot of time, and a lot of effort. But everyone wants to sue, but no one wants to actually foot the bill like that. One last thing I like to just comment on, and that is, this entire business of why no one's asking for the evidence. I think the primary thesis that's been put on the table today is that the colonial narrative that has been built for the last 200 years by the Indologists or their modern avatars, like the Trushkes and the Pollocks and Doniger and Witzel, has managed to convince the Western world that that the Hindu society at large is truly evil, and therefore anything bad you say about them must be true. So I think that's the primary thesis. However, there's another potential reason, possibly. Recently, I had the privilege of speaking with an eminent scholar of our times, Padma Bhushan Professor Kapil Kapoorji. I happened to be in India, and I had some time that I spent with him. He made an interesting observation. He said, and it's well known, but he said that the Western civilization actually carries a huge amount of civilizational guilt on their psyche. The 350 years of slave trade, the near complete decimation of the Native Americans, the Aztecs, Mayans, and the Inca civilization, the pagan civilization, and the Jews, surely is a huge psychological burden on the society. By rights, the Western civilization should be declared as genocidal. The only reason that hasn't happened is because they control all the channels of communication, all the channels of knowledge. However, they are always eager to transfer the guilt of their sins onto other societies. A cut and paste job, as Professor Kapoor put it. So when you're so fixated on finding innocent standbys to shift your guilt to, I guess looking for evidence is not your highest priority. So I think with that, we will close for the day. Any parting comments from any of the panelists?
I will make one comment.
I have one too.
Yeah, and this is with reference to a question by Sophia. See, when we ask the question, where do we find Hindu scholars, Hindu academics who are engaged with these issues from an academically rigorous perspective, and how do how to foster a dialogue between non-Hindu academics and Hindu academics on a level playing field, right? Where there is a back and forth, a responsible conversation going on between academics from both sides of this issue. How to foster that, right? So if we ask the question, it seems to be the question Sophia is asking. So the difficulty there, right, is that the institutions, the Western humanities, where the Western humanities are being studied and propagated and established, they are not favorably disposed towards admitting Hindu voices into those disciplines at all. They are interested in silencing the Hindu voice. And Hindus haven't built their own institutions. In fact, we are trying to create one in the form of Hindu University of America. And I would welcome everybody to get involved with this university in order to not only take courses, study these matters in much more detail, but also write and start to participate in this dialogue, which I think will emerge in course of time. But it's just too early for that right now, and the power differential is too huge at this point in time. So I'd like to welcome everybody who hasn't taken the Orientation to Hindu Studies course to join, because we'll dedicate a couple of classes entirely to the caste, Varna, Jati, and caste issue in that class. And with that, I'll yield my time back to Subhashri.
Yeah, so actually, Kalyanji, thanks for making that point. By the way, there is another survey on your screen to see if you're interested in taking any of these courses at HUA. But I'm not actually associated with HUA, but I have been a student at times of various courses at HUA. I would highly recommend the orientation course that Kalyanji pointed to. So with that, being mindful of, going almost 13, 14 minutes over, I'm going to thank everyone who joined the conversation today. This is an important topic of our times. It's, some of us may not feel the heat today, but rest assured, next generation, your children and their children will feel the heat, and it becomes, these issues become more and more prevalent in the society. Not only educational opportunities, employment opportunities, but also, acceptance in the society will become a challenge. So I think it's important for us to be aware of these things and educate ourselves on these things, and just do whatever we can to support initiatives like whether it's Hindu Vesha or 100 other initiatives like that are in this ecosystem. With that, thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists for your excellent ideas and thoughts that you shared with our audience, and thank you HUA for hosting it. This for Hindu Dvesha, and namaskar everyone. On this note, we will close. Dhanyavad.